Well, I am so excited to present to you the story of God and his people. And this is a 3-month journey that we're about to embark on today. And I've been looking forward to this for years, actually. It's been in the making. When Rob and I took our midlife manly adventure riding horses for 3 days in Wyoming 2 years ago, the Lord just sort of downloaded this. It was a teaching that I had done not for 15 weeks, a shortened version, but the importance of seeing the narrative, the whole Bible story in chronological form, and the events and characters in the Bible presented on a timeline, and give us all a strong foundation of our Bible understanding, our Bible knowledge, because I really believe it's important that we know the Word, that we know things about the Word, and people that are in the Word, and events that took place in the Word. And I remember flying home from that trip and just jotting it all down and presenting it to Rob, and he loved it. He embraced it. He said, this is exactly what the Lilly Foundation that's funding the sabbatical is looking for. What's the plan when you're gone? And so we carefully laid it out and wrote it up, and so I've written this series, and my hope is that you're as blessed to receive it as I am to give it. Now, I wanted to show you why we have a timeline. In this timeline, this is going to be one of our stage props throughout the 3 months. And you'll see that this blank slate, if you will become filled with names and details and places and events that take place throughout the Bible narrative. Now, I have it stretched over 24 feet, which represents about 5,500 years. And so over 15 weeks, you'll start to see us fill up different epochs or different sections of this timeline with the events that we're going to be speaking about. Obviously, the first one we're going to talk about is the subject of creation, the creation of the world, of the universe. When Lord Jesus was with God and was God, and God moved over the face of the deep and created. That's what we're going to talk about. And this is taking place around 4,000 BC or prior, because it alludes to a prior, that this is what we can sense, but we calculate a little further than that. But let me show you what we're going to do once we get past this week, and we'll spend some time on this week. We're going to talk about Adam and Eve, and we're going to go on from there, and we're going to get to the point where it comes to be passing the 3,500 mark, and the population of the world starts to take place, and 3,000, and moving on, and we're going to get to probably around this spot where Noah is born, and the flood takes place. And we'll talk about Noah and the flood, and this is about 2,500 BC and Tower of Babel. And then we'll get to the 2,000 mark and introduce you to some of the important characters of Genesis as well, BC. And that's Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, who take place in this section. And then from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, we also get their son Joseph. And Joseph leads them into the children of Israel to Egypt. So hundreds of years are in Egypt until probably around this mark where Moses is raised up. And I say this mark because it's about 1,500, prior to 1,500 BC. And the story continues because Moses, he's writing all the things that we just talked about. He's writing them as they're freed from Egypt in the wilderness. And then from Moses, we see that they reclaim the promised land after 40 years in the wilderness. And we'll talk a lot about that because that's important. Multiple weeks from now. And then Joshua and the promised land. And then the time of the judges. And from the judges, people like Samson and Deborah. We'll learn about those folks. We'll go on to the time of the kings. And this is around the 1,000 mark. And the kings I'm talking about are the great first 3 kings of Israel. Saul and David and Solomon. And all of them have many stories in their lives. And we're going to see those. And then we go on from the kings, and we'll spend some time talking about the prophets of God, like Isaiah, Ezekiel, Elijah, who spoke the word of God to the kings. And if they obeyed, then there was blessing. If they disobeyed, there was consequences. And so by the time we get to 500, again, BC, we see the consequences of disobedience, where the northern kingdom of Israel is scattered by the Assyrians, and the southern kingdom of Judah is destroyed by the king of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, and the temple is destroyed. And then there's what they call, after that time period, after the rebuilding of the temple, 400 years of silence. Well, God's never silent, but the prophets were silent until probably the most important date on our timeline that takes place about 4 BC, oddly enough, but that's how it is, when Jesus was born. And obviously, we're going to spend multiple days talking about Jesus, his life, his teaching, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, and then the church. And as the church starts to take form and to grow and expand throughout, the regions of Asia Minor and beyond. And then after the church age, we'll see what emerges after the scrolls are written, the epistles are written, the gospels are written, and we'll talk about the formation of the Bible, the 66 books of the canon, and that's probably 100 and something years after this mark. And then we'll get into a time where Christianity is being oppressed, and people are being thrown to the lions in the Colosseum in Rome and martyred and crucified by the heavy hand of the Roman government until the Roman emperor, after seeing a vision, becomes a Christian and starts making the Christianity the state religion. So we will talk about that time in this century of Constantine and how that changed the church, particularly in Europe. And then on into what's known, and this is about the 500 mark, of the Dark Ages, when the Latin Vulgate takes all the scriptures and keeps them from the common man. And so we end up in this place called the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages here. Not much technology, not much art, not much theology, very little growth in the organic church until a time period around this time where after the Bible had been made available by people like Wycliffe and Tyndale and made widely available by something called the printing press, and how the Wittenberg door, the 95 Theses, was posted on the Wittenberg door that broke open what's known as the Protestant Reformation, where churches start to explode and expand again all throughout Europe and beyond. And then, that's quite a journey, and this will be probably around Christmas time, and sometime after Christmas, I believe, Rob will take it from there and talk about what he's learned while he's been traveling in Europe and the latter-day revivals that lead us up to the present age. But I'm taking this first 5,500 years, and I'm going to share it with you. Does that sound like a good journey? All right. I'm excited to do it. Now, I want to just say this, is that any time you're approaching this type of theme, you have to remember that this is not an intellectual pursuit. This is a faith journey. And sometimes theology becomes so heady that it becomes just data collection, fact retention. I don't want that to be the case. There will be a lot of facts thrown up on this board, a lot of information. But don't forget that we walk by faith, not by sight. Proverbs 3:5 tells us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So as we approach this, yes, there will be facts. Yes, there will be information. But remember to just lead with your heart. Trust with your heart. This is a relationship that we're walking into, not an academic pursuit. I often say this in my Bible study, that theology is not an absolute science. An absolute science is something like mathematics, where certain numbers can put together a certain way or taken away, divided, whatever it might be, always comes to the same result. Chemistry, another one, where the same elements or substance in the same environment, under the same situation, always results in similar results. Bible, theology, we've been studying this book for 1,900 years, since the time that it was put together. And major faiths and denominations think very differently about the same text after studying it for 1,900 years than others. And you come to folks that feel very strongly that the word means this, and others that say, well, it's interpreted this way. And so when I say it's not an absolute science, I mean that it's a faith journey. Now, I had a good late friend, Alice Cheng. She corrected me. She said, but Raphael, it is an absolute science, but we just won't know the absolutes until we get to heaven. She's right. She's right. Even Paul, the great apostle who studied not only wrote most of the New Testament, but studied the Torah and the Tanakh. He says in 1 Corinthians 13:12, now we see things imperfectly like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything more clearly. All I know now is partial and incomplete, but I will know everything completely, just as God knows completely. And so he's saying, right now we see in part in 1 Corinthians 13, but then we will know fully. Then we will know face to face. And even through the Bible, Isaiah 55 says, my thoughts are not like your thoughts. My ways are beyond your ways. For just as the heavens are high above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts wiser than your thoughts. So we can't really be like God. I like Romans 11. And Romans 11:33 says, oh, the depths of the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable, how unpassable, how unfathomable are they past finding out. In other words, you think you can absorb and contain all the knowledge of God? You can't. Sorry, it's unfathomable, it's unsearchable. However, we are to be like the Bereans and show ourselves faithful to study and to know his word. And it serves us well as we know his word. Now, I want to say this too before we start our journey, is that the overarching story of God, the overarching theme is one word, and that is love. 1 John 4:8 says, God is love. And I truly believe that this is a story of love. I believe God at his very core, the core of his very identity, is a father. Isaiah 9 calls him the everlasting Father. Jesus, when he teaches us to pray and direct our prayer to God, he says, pray like this, our Father. He knew him better than anyone else. So he, God, is at his very core a father who desires a relationship of love with us, the sons and daughters of the living God. And I believe that when we talk about this creation, and when he moves over the face of the deep and creates a beautiful land and trees and animals and fish and birds and a garden, and then creates us, mankind, men and women, I think he did this for this one reason that I know very well. I can imagine him having created all these things and just about to create man on that sixth day with this sense of longing to have little ones that he could love and care for and provide for. You ever think about, we have a couple of guys on our staff who are fathers-to-be, will be fathers very soon, and they're preparing their household, they're preparing their homes, and they have this longing that very soon they're going to have a child, someone that's made in their own image that they can love. I remember before we had our children, there was a time when the doctors told Allie and I, very unlikely, you probably can't have children. And it was hurtful. It was really a bitter thing to accept because we really wanted children. I remember praying and longing and having hands laid on us and many prayer sessions over this. And eventually, we had children, 2 beautiful twins. Yeah. So grateful. You guys know that feeling. And I'll tell you what, when we finally had these children, we were so relieved and so filled with exuberance and joy. And they're not identical twins. One looks actually a little bit like me, and one looks a little like Allie. I hope they both look like Allie when they're older, because who wants 2 women to look like me? That's not going to be, it'd be terrible. But we were so thrilled to have these 2. I was able to be a father, and this rush of love just poured out of me. Where is this coming from? Who made me? God made me. It's coming right from the same DNA of God the Father. And I truly believe, thank you. And I truly believe that this was the impetus of him creating the nursery and having it all prepared just right, the trees and the animals and the plants and the beautiful garden. And that when he moved over the face of the deep, he was able to fully realize this. Isaiah 64 says, "Oh, yet, O Lord, you are our Father. We're the clay, you're the potter. We're all formed by your hand." John 1 will quote that a lot. When the Word became flesh, here's what it actually says. So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's only Son. And Ephesians 4, there is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, and Father, who is over all and in all and living through all. God, at his very core, is our Father. So what I want to do is to just point to this creation. And as we talk about it, we're going to read the first chapter of Genesis. Think about God the Father as he is creating all the things that we're about to read about. And as we read Genesis 1, first chapter of the Torah, bear in mind that it was written probably around this time by Moses in the wilderness, and he wrote about all the things that preceded to that point. So let's, if you would, relax. I'm going to read this, and won't normally read the whole chapter because we're going to study topics, but let's just do that for the sake of the first of these 15 sessions. The first 10 words of Genesis 1 are the same in practically every version. Whether you read the NLT, which is what we use on stage and on the platform here, New Living Translation, or the NIV, or the ESV, or the New American Standard Bible, or the King James Version, or the New King James Version, or any of the other popular translations, the first 10 words are identical in almost every single one of these translations. And here they are. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is the truth that we base the whole story of God and his people on. That phrase, those 10 words. And then it goes on in verse 2. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. I'm not sure when the water was created, but we'll think about that another time. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. In Hebrew, the word is tov. Then God said, let there be a space between the waters, to separate the waters of heaven from the waters of earth. And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. And God called the space sky. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the second day. Then God said, let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear. And that's what happened. God called the dry ground land, and the waters seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant and tree that grows seed-bearing fruit. These seeds then will produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came. And that is exactly what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants with trees and seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the third day. Then God said, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. And let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth. And that is what happened. God made two great lights, larger one to govern the day and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was very tov, very good. He saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fourth day. Then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind. So God created the great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind. Livestock, cute little small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And this is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us, and he uses the word us, and this is a nod towards the Trinity. Remember we said in the beginning the Word was with God, and the Word was God? Jesus was there. Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, the wild animals on the earth, and the cute little small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground, the little cute ones. And then God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I've given you every green plant as food for the wild animals, the birds of the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. You know which ones I'm talking about. And everything that has life. And that is what happened. Then God looked over all that he made, and this time he said, it is very good. Tov mon, very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. And we'll just pause there. That's the first chapter of Genesis. And so you see what happened. He created all the earth and sky and the animals, and he created man and women, who he could love and have the unique ability to love him back. That's why he created us, to love and to be loved by. That's why we're in his image. He gave them free will, and they, by their own volition, could love him back. And he saw all that he made, and he experienced this relationship with his creation, and he said, very good. And then chapter 2, he says he rested on that seventh day. The seventh day, he just rested. Now, what we had here was the whole foundation of the earth, the universe, the animals, everything, biology, everything, geography, was all in that one chapter. All in one chapter. God spoke things into being, and as he spoke, so they were. But it's important to remember that what we read was not necessarily his architectural plan about how he made the elements, how he made each rock, how he made each planet. This is the narrative of Moses that he wrote while he was in the wilderness, and he wrote what God gave him. On Mount Sinai, God revealed these things to him, so he just wrote it. It's not an engineering plan. It's the narrative explanation. He could have given us more detail. In fact, Moses, when he wrote about the tabernacle, the tent of worship that they moved around the desert, he wrote 13 chapters about how to build it, every inch, every piece of material, every dimension, every furnishing. 13 chapters of detail, a full-on schematic, a full-on mechanical architectural plan. In fact, Solomon, when he wrote his about the temple, God gave him details about how to build the temple. 5, maybe 6 chapters of detail about the size and the materials of each and every decoration and furnishing and dimension. But the whole world, we get one chapter. Sometimes we make the mistake of trying to pull so much detail out of this when we look beyond the word. I know that theology, as I mentioned before, sometimes it causes more division than it does unity. As we study, sometimes we'll take a position about some theological point or doctrinal issue, and it'll be different from a brother or a sister. Instead of us walking in unity, sometimes we walk in division and divisiveness. And I want to commit to you that we will not do that here. You're allowed to have an interpretation of any part of the Bible that's different than ours. We'll present what we believe to be true, but we're not unified because of our uniformity. We're unified because of our unity. Amen? Well, last night we had David Schroeder, Dr. David Schroeder, who's a friend and mentor of ours, and he came and presented the popular theories about the interpretation of Genesis 1 to us. And so I asked him either for his notes or if I had the permission to videotape his 6 or 7 minute segment and show it on Sunday morning. Guess which one we're going to do? We're going to see the video. So can we go to the videotape, please? And please welcome Dr. David Schroeder to this stage.
What is the age of the earth? That's one of the big questions. And, you know, I really feel for young people because they sit in their science classes and have these professors who you know, teach as fact scientific theories. But scientific assertion says that the earth is about 4.54 billion years old. They do this based on carbon-14 calculations from the oldest rocks. They look at geological strata in places and so on, and they calculate that the earth itself is over 4 billion years old. Now, there's also the young earth theory that says, well, based on genealogies, counting the genealogies in the Bible with the idea that a generation is about 40 years old, assuming we have every name and there were no gaps and so on, we do the mathematics, and Bishop Ussher calculated that the earth was created in 4004 BC, doing it that way. This is one of those areas where I'm glad my salvation doesn't depend upon this, that I have the right theory exactly. And as Pastor Raphael said, this isn't the heart and soul of the gospel. Yeah, we'd like to know, but we don't need to know exactly. Let's look at a couple of these ideas of the different ages of the earth. Warren Johns wrote an interesting article called Strategies for Origins, and he says, where we stand on the science-religion questions is usually predetermined by how much involvement we wish to allow the Creator in His work of creation, by how much weight we give to the testimony of scientists, and by how literally we interpret the Genesis accounts. So the key word there is predetermined. Most of us come to the Genesis account with an idea in our mind of what we want it to say, what we hope it will say, what we want it to be for us. And some come a little bit fearful that if I interpret it in any other way than the most literal way, then I've kind of tossed out all the credibility of the Bible. I'm not of that position particularly, but most of us do kind of end up where we start in a way. So here are some of these theories of the ages of the earth. So, and these are all creationist theories. Of course, there are atheistic theories as well of how the earth was formed, but I doubt if there's anyone here who needs a whole lot of explanation about those. We all believe the very first words, the 10 words that Raphael showed us. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created. So there are about 6 what are generally called old earth theories of the universe. And we're going to dig down into each of these in a moment. Progressive creationism, concordism, mosaic vision, multiple gap, multiple catastrophism, and the gap theory. Those are old earth theories. And the young earth theories are called Fiat Creationism and apparent age. I don't want to get overly academic, but I want you to see some of the things, some of the ideas that creationists have propounded as strategies of origins. So let's move on. So progressive creationism is this idea that there are numerous acts of creation throughout the geological time, not in the order of Genesis 1. That there many times God imposed an upgrading, let's say a new model, like you get with your phone and so on, of, okay, the next step in the way. I'm particularly excited about that idea, but there are those who believe that. Concordism is the idea that there are numerous acts of creation throughout geological time exactly in the same order as Genesis 1. Now, this idea would be very comfortable with the earth being 4.5 billion years old and say that at different times, God brought about the things that are described as day 1, day 2, maybe millions and millions of years later, day 3, maybe millions and millions of years later. That's what concordism would teach. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to do mosaic vision for a moment. Look at the others first. Multiple gap is the idea that there are 6 literal days of creation, but they're scattered throughout geological time. It's literally a 24-hour period of creation of each of those days, but there were a lot of, maybe, again, millions of years between those days when creation occurred. But they were literally a 24-hour event each time. And then multiple catastrophism is that there were many catastrophes accompanied by many acts of creation, the last one being Genesis 1. And people who really want to try to figure out, well, where do the dinosaurs fit in and so on, they might say, well, yes, there were catastrophes, there were dinosaurs, there were maybe even different kinds of beings, but there were maybe other floods, other major catastrophes that pretty much obliterated a lot of the earth during those times. But then Genesis 1 comes after on the heels of all of those. And the closest there has been to that then has been, of course, the Noahic flood, and God said, I'm never going to do that again. The gap theory says that nearly all of the geological history is inserted between verses 1 and 3 of Genesis 1, that there was light created, there was darkness on the face of the earth, and then in verse 3, God says, okay, now we're going to get on with the acts of creation, starting with light and then separating the sky from the other water and so on. The Mosaic vision, okay, this is for those of you who are really uncomfortable with any of this, all right? And it's a way that I've had to use in class to escape the tomatoes and eggs flying at me, is this has nothing to do with what actually happened when God did all this. This was a week when Moses over here was on the mountain, and God said, okay, Moses, I'm going to tell you how I did this. So come to meet with me on Sunday morning, and I'm going to tell you on day one, Sunday morning, here's what I did. And so I'm going to just give you a snapshot on that day. Then come back on Monday, and so Moses comes back, and okay, day 2, God showed me that he separated the waters. And then he came back on Tuesday, and on day 3, Moses said, I saw this, and God separated the land from the water. And then day 4, I came back the next day. So the idea has to do with 7 days of revelation, not necessarily of creation in that way. It's kind of fanciful, but it's sort of an escape in case you need to get out from under the heat. Okay, let's look at the 2 young earth theories here. And I think probably most believers are more comfortable with these ideas. Fiat Creationism says that the earth and all living things were created in a span of 6 literal days, about 6,000 to 15,000 years ago. And again, the Bible doesn't give us a timeline like we're developing here. We know some of these things. Probably, coming back to around 3,000, we begin to timeline out some of these people that we're going to be looking at. But before that, we don't really have dates. But 6,000 years ago, maybe 15,000. But literally, God did this in a span of 6 literal days. The word for day, as we said before, is yom. It does not mean literally only 24 hours. Sometimes it means that, but it's a generic term for an undisclosed period of time. So you can't come down overly hard on that, and the word yom there. Then there's the parent age creationism, which is a literal 6-day creation week that includes not only all living things, but also most of the fossil record, because that's the big sticking point between science and faith. Some people say, okay, we see these fossils, and you date those fossils as millions and millions of years old. Well, God could have created it that way. He could have stuck those fossils in the stones 6,000 years ago and make them look like they're millions of years or billions of years old just to test our faith. Will we really believe? Well, I'm not sure God works that way. I don't think that really needs to be the way God's going to challenge my faith. But again, I'm just presenting ideas that some people have believed in. So let's move on. I just want to kind of close this off by, I think, a really important idea. There's no contradiction between what the Bible actually says and what science has proven. And you need to help our young people understand this. There's no contradiction between what the Bible actually says and what science has really proven. The contradictions, the problems exist between specific interpretations of the Bible and unproven scientific theories. That's where the rub is. And when we get in conversations where there are differences of opinion, we need to make sure that we're not just elevating our interpretation of the Bible to be, that is exactly what happened and exactly what has to be believed or you're not a Christian. And on the other hand, we don't want either to allow people to be foisting upon us scientific theories that have not been proven and then making us conform to those beliefs, or we're not scientific or we're not intellectual, we're kind of out of touch with reality. So, Raphael, that's kind of how I see looking at this creation account. But I just want to say, it's a beautiful, beautiful account. And what God wants us to know from Genesis 1 isn't exactly the timetable and the order and the way he did it. What he wants us to know is that God said, let there be. And all of these things happen. And they're there for a purpose. And that purpose is to glorify God. And we get beyond that, we are out of bounds.
Amen. And so we're going to hear, he's going to do the sermon the first weekend in October, and so we're excited to have him as part of the journey, along with several other great men of God who have studied quite a bit. But what he just said is that the purpose of this is not proving any kind of scientific or theological theory. It's to take God at his word and to believe. And I really believe that believe is the basis of our faith. I want to say this is that those first 10 words, if you can just believe that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, the heavens and the earth, that's the building block of our faith. And if you don't believe that, you're going to have a problem with so much of the other parts of the Bible. In fact, the whole other core of the Bible will collapse unless you believe that he is the creator. The first name that they gave God was, when they recognized him, was an unpronounceable name, which is most closely pronounced Yahweh, Y-H-W-H, which means creator of all things that are created. Creator of all things that are created. That's who God is. And so it's important that we believe this. Our belief, our faith will be challenged in these days of advanced knowledge and access to information, that we believe this. All throughout the New Testament, Revelation 4 says, "You're worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and power because you created all things that are created." Proverbs, Solomon says, by his wisdom, God created the heavens and the earth. In Romans 4, it says, 17 says, God called all things into existence. Colossians 1, God created all things, visible and invisible. Acts 4 said, God is the absolute creator of everything. Acts 17, creation is dependent upon God for its very existence. And Jesus even said, God created all of them. He made them male and female. Jesus calls him our creator. It's important that we believe this. And, as we wind down this portion of our series, this first week, we believe that God created this wonderful place, the Garden of Eden, and these wonderful beings, these creatures, and then men and women. And it was very good, he says. But something happened that changed all that. Something happened where it went from good to very bad. And that's when sin entered the picture. Adam and Eve would spend their days in the cool of the evening fellowshipping with God, and God enjoying their fellowship and the relationship, until Satan took the form of a serpent and introduced sin into the world. You see, in the middle of the Garden of Eden, there was a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a beautiful tree with beautiful fruit. And this tree was the only thing that they had, the only rule they had. Just don't eat of that tree, God says in Genesis 2. You could eat of every other tree, but just don't eat of that one. Why did he do that? He gave them the opportunity to demonstrate obedience, to demonstrate commitment, their devotion to him. By abstaining from and rejecting the temptation, God received that as love. Everything was perfect. And if they would just have stayed away, then they would have remained in this beautiful relationship, in this beautiful garden with God. But enter Satan, who comes in the form of a serpent and deceives the woman and says, what did God say? Oh, if I eat of that tree, I'll surely die. God lied to you. You won't surely die. In fact, you'll be so knowledgeable that you'll be like him. You wouldn't need him anymore. She was tempted. So she took the fruit and she ate it. She offered some to her husband. He said, sure. And he ate it too. And then everything changed. It's almost like a dark cloud descended over the Garden of Eden. And the relationship with God and man received, for the first time, separation. Separation is exactly what sin is. It's a separation between us and God. And so when God came in the cool of the evening, we see in Genesis 2, he asks Adam, he says, where are you? Where are you? And Adam says, we hid from you. We hid. There was a separation now. And so what we see in this journey of God and his people is that from this point on, from the time of sin, all throughout the Old Testament, they're dealing with this issue of sin, this separation. A God who longs to be in relationship, love relationship with his people, yet having to come up with really solutions for sin. That's where the blood sacrifice comes in, the sin offerings and things like that, temple sacrifices. And finally, when it became so bad that they had to, in 500 BC, that the temple that they sacrificed was destroyed by God's will, by the Babylonians, and they were sent into exile, the final solution to restore relationship between God and man came in the form of Jesus. That's the beauty of the sacrifice of the cross.